Joseph Walking Bear had been alone for so long that he almost forgot what his own voice sounded like. At 32, he lived in a small trailer on the edge of the Navajo reservation, surrounded by nothing but red rocks and endless sky. His weathered hands bore the scars of ranch work, and his dark eyes held the weight of too many empty nights. The storm clouds were building on the horizon when he first saw her running across the desert. She moved like a frightened deer, her long black hair streaming behind her as she stumbled over the rocky ground. Her white wedding dress was torn and dirty, and even from a distance Joseph could see the terror in her movements. He had been fixing fence posts when she appeared like a ghost against the red landscape. Most people would have minded their own business, but Joseph wasn't most people. His grandmother had always told him that the spirits brought people to you when they needed help most. As the young woman collapsed near a cluster of sagebrush, Joseph knew this was one of those moments. The wind was picking up, and the smell of rain hung heavy in the air. Desert storms could be deadly, especially for someone who didn't know the land. Joseph grabbed his water bottle and first aid kit from his truck and walked toward the fallen figure, his boots crunching on the dry earth. When he reached her, she looked up with wild, frightened eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the sharp features and bronze skin that spoke of Apache heritage. Her wedding dress was expensive but ruined, covered in dust and torn at the hem. Blood seeped through a cut on her arm where she had scraped against a thorny bush. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from running and crying. "Please don't send me back." Joseph knelt beside her and offered the water bottle. "Nobody's sending you anywhere you don't want to go," he said quietly. His voice was rusty from disuse but gentle. "My name is Joseph. What's yours?" She hesitated, looking around as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the rocks. "Maria," she finally said. "Maria Santos." The thunder rumbled closer and Joseph felt the first drops of rain on his face. "Maria, there's a big storm coming. My place isn't much, but it's dry and warm. Will you let me help you?" She studied his face for a long moment, searching for signs of deception or danger. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Joseph helped her to her feet, noticing how she winced when she put weight on her left ankle. As they walked slowly toward his truck, Maria kept looking over her shoulder. "They'll come looking for me," she said. "When they find out I ran away from the wedding, they'll come." Joseph opened the passenger door of his old pickup truck and helped her inside. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," he said simply. "Right now, let's get you out of this storm." The rain began in earnest as they drove the short distance to his trailer. Joseph lived simply, with just the basics he needed to get by. His trailer was clean but sparse, decorated only with a few photos of his grandmother and some traditional Navajo blankets she had. He settled Maria on his small couch and brought her clean clothes, one of his old shirts and a pair of sweatpants that would be too big but dry. While she changed in the tiny bathroom, he made coffee and heated up a can of soup on his small stove. When she emerged, looking small and lost in his oversized clothes, Joseph had a hot meal waiting for her. They ate in comfortable silence while the storm raged outside, rain pounding against the thin walls of the trailer and wind howling through the desert. "Why are you helping me?" Maria asked suddenly, setting down her empty soup bowl. Joseph considered the question seriously. "My grandmother used to say that we're all connected," he said. "That when someone needs help, it's not really a choice whether to give it. It's just what you do." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "I can't go back, but I have nowhere else to go." "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," Joseph told her. "The storm will pass and tomorrow things might look different." As if to emphasize his point, lightning illuminated the small windows, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the trailer. Maria jumped, and Joseph noticed how she pulled his shirt tighter around herself. "Tell me about the wedding," he said gently, "only if you want to." Maria stared into her coffee cup for a long time before speaking. "It was arranged," she said finally. "My father owed money to a man named Rodriguez. A lot of money. The only way to pay it back was to give him me." Joseph's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Rodriguez is older than my father," Maria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has other wives, and I've heard stories about what happens to women who displease him. When I tried to tell my parents I couldn't do it, they said it was my duty to save the family." "So you ran," Joseph said. "So I ran." She looked up at him with eyes full of pain and determination. Right there at the altar in front of everyone. I couldn't say those vows and condemn myself to that life. The storm was getting worse, and Joseph could hear debris hitting the side of his trailer. He was glad he had found Maria when he did. Nobody should be out in weather like this, especially not someone alone and afraid. "They'll send men to look for me," Maria said, as if reading his thoughts. "Rodriguez has connections everywhere. When morning comes, they'll start searching." Joseph met her gaze steadily. "Then we'll be ready for them," he said. Something in his quiet certainty seemed to calm her fears, at least for the moment. As the night wore on and the storm continued its assault on the desert, Maria curled up on Joseph's couch under one of his grandmother's blankets. Joseph took the floor, listening to the wind and thinking about the choice he had made to help this stranger. He had lived alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to have another person in his space. But as he listened to Maria's steady breathing and watched the storm rage outside, Joseph realized that for the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the desert washed clean and sparkling in the early morning light. Joseph woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly around his small kitchen. Maria had woken before him and was attempting to make breakfast with the few supplies she could find. "You didn't have to do that," Joseph said, sitting up and stretching the kinks out of his back from sleeping on the floor. Maria turned from the stove where she was scrambling eggs. In the morning light, cleaned up and rested, she was even more beautiful than he had first thought. But it was the strength in her bearing that caught his attention. Despite everything she had been through, she held herself with dignity. "You saved my life last night," she said simply. "Making breakfast is the least I can do." They ate together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting the rocks outside in shades of gold and orange. Through the small window, Joseph could see his cattle moving slowly across the range, none the worse for the storm. "What will you do now?" Joseph asked as they finished eating. Maria was quiet for a moment, staring out at the vast landscape. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have a cousin in Phoenix who might help me, but I don't know how to get there without being caught. And I don't want to bring trouble to her family." Joseph was about to respond when the sound of vehicles approaching made them both freeze. Through the window, they could see a cloud of dust rising from the dirt road that led to his trailer. 2 black SUVs were heading their way. "They found me," Maria whispered, her face going pale. "Oh God, they found me already." Joseph moved to the window and peered out carefully. The vehicles were expensive and out of place in this remote part of the reservation. Men in dark suits were getting out, and even from a distance Joseph could see they were armed. "Get in the back bedroom and stay quiet," he told Maria urgently. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Maria grabbed his arm. "They'll hurt you if they think you're helping me," she said desperately. "I can't let that happen." Joseph gently removed her hand from his arm. "Trust me," he said, looking directly into her eyes. "I know how to handle this." Reluctantly, Maria disappeared into the back of the trailer. Joseph took a deep breath, checked to make sure his own rifle was loaded and within reach, and opened the front door. 4 men approached his trailer, their expensive shoes completely wrong for the desert terrain. The man in front was clearly in charge, his silver hair slicked back and his face carrying the kind of hardness that came from years of getting his way through intimidation and violence. "You Joseph Walking Bear?" the man asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Depends who's asking," Joseph replied, keeping his voice calm and his hands visible. "Name's Rodriguez," the man said, confirming Joseph's suspicions. "I'm looking for someone. A young woman who might have passed through here last night during the storm." Joseph studied the men carefully. They were professionals, but they were also out of their element here on the reservation. City men who relied on fear and money to get their way, but who didn't understand the desert or the people who lived in it. "Lots of people get lost out here during storms," Joseph said conversationally. "Most of them don't survive the night." Rodriguez stepped closer, his eyes hard. "This particular woman was wearing a wedding dress. She belonged to me and I want her back." The casual way he said "belonged to me" made Joseph's blood boil, but he kept his expression neutral. "Like I said, the desert's not kind to people who don't know it. Storm like we had last night, anybody caught out in it would be in serious trouble." "Are you telling me she's dead?" Rodriguez demanded. Joseph shrugged. "I'm telling you that people die out here all the time, especially people who are running scared and don't know where they're going." One of Rodriguez's men stepped forward. "Boss, let me search the place. He's hiding something." Rodriguez held up a hand to stop him. Now, Mr. Walking Bear, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm prepared to pay well for information about this woman. Very well. Joseph crossed his arms. And I'm telling you I don't have any information worth paying for. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Joseph could feel the weight of his rifle just inside the door. But he also knew that starting a gunfight would put Maria in even more danger. Rodriguez's phone buzzed, and he answered it curtly. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at Joseph with renewed interest. Interesting, he said. That was one of my men. He found a torn piece of white fabric caught on some brush about a mile from here. Fabric from a wedding dress. Joseph's heart sank, but he kept his face impassive. Like I said, lots of people don't make it through storms like that. So you won't mind if we search your property then, Rodriguez said. But it wasn't really a question. Actually, I would mind, Joseph replied. This is reservation land and you don't have jurisdiction here. You want to search my place, you'll need to go through tribal police first. Rodriguez's face darkened with anger. Don't try to hide behind legal technicalities, boy. I have connections that reach everywhere, including your precious tribal government. Maybe so, Joseph said calmly. But right now, right here, you're on my land without permission. And I'm asking you to leave. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Joseph could sense Rodriguez calculating the risks of pushing further versus the potential rewards. Finally, the older man smiled coldly. Have it your way, Rodriguez said, but this isn't over. I'll be back with the proper paperwork, and when I am, I'll tear this place apart board by board until I find what I'm looking for. You do what you feel you need to do, Joseph replied. As Rodriguez and his men climbed back into their vehicles, the older man rolled down his window. You're making a mistake, Walking Bear. That woman belongs to me and I always collect what's mine. When I come back, it won't be just to search. It'll be to settle accounts. Joseph watched the vehicles disappear in a cloud of dust, then waited another 10 minutes to make sure they were really gone before calling out to Maria. She emerged from the back room, her face streaked with tears. I heard everything, she said. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. I should leave now before they come back with more men. Joseph looked at her seriously. Where would you go? They found you once, they'll find you again. And next time, you might not have anywhere to run. Then what do you suggest? Maria asked desperately. Joseph was quiet for a moment, thinking hard. When he spoke again, his voice was firm with decision. We make a stand, he said. Together. They think they can come onto my land and threaten me. They're mistaken, and they definitely can't take someone who doesn't want to go. Maria stared at him in amazement. You barely know me, she said. Why would you risk everything to help me? Joseph met her gaze directly. Because everybody deserves the right to choose their own path, he said simply. And because sometimes when you've been alone long enough, the spirits send you someone worth fighting for. After Rodriguez and his men left, Joseph knew they had very little time before they returned in greater numbers and with legal backing that might force even the tribal police to cooperate. He spent the morning making phone calls to people he hadn't spoken to in years, calling in old favors and reaching out to connections he had almost forgotten he had. Maria watched him with growing amazement as he transformed from a quiet, solitary rancher into someone who clearly understood how to prepare for a fight. His first call was to his cousin Tommy, who worked for tribal security. His second was to an old army buddy who now ran a legal aid clinic in Flagstaff. Tommy says Rodriguez has been making moves to get mining rights on reservation land. Joseph told Maria after hanging up from his third call. This isn't just about getting you back. He's been trying to gain influence with tribal officials for months. Maria felt her stomach drop. So I really did bring all this trouble to you, she said miserably. Joseph turned to look at her, his expression serious but kind. Maria, men like Rodriguez don't need an excuse to cause trouble. They create it wherever they go. If it wasn't you today, it would be something else tomorrow. He moved to a small cabinet and pulled out a metal box that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside were his military medals, some legal documents, and a satellite phone that looked expensive and well-maintained. I need to tell you some things about me, Joseph said, setting the phone on the table. Things that might change how you feel about accepting my help. Maria sat down across from him, curious and a little worried by his serious tone. I wasn't always a rancher living alone in the desert, Joseph began. I spent 8 years in the army, most of it with special forces. I did 3 tours overseas in places where men like Rodriguez are common. I learned how to fight people who think money and violence can get them anything they want. He paused, looking down at his hands. When I came back, I couldn't handle being around people anymore. Too many memories, too much noise in my head. That's why I came out here to be alone. What changed? Maria asked quietly. Joseph looked up at her and she saw something vulnerable in his dark eyes. You did, he said simply. For the first time in 5 years, I have something worth protecting besides myself. The satellite phone rang, interrupting the moment. Joseph answered quickly, speaking in clipped military phrases that Maria didn't entirely understand. When he hung up, his expression was grim. That was my buddy Mike from Legal Aid, he said. Rodriguez has already filed papers claiming you're mentally unstable and that he has legal guardianship over you through your father's debts. He's also claiming I kidnapped you. Maria felt the walls closing in around her. Then it's over, she said despairingly. He's going to win. Not necessarily, Joseph replied. Mike says the papers are shaky at best. Arranged marriages aren't legally binding in Arizona, and debt can't be transferred to family members in the form of human collateral. But it'll take time to fight it in court, and Rodriguez isn't going to wait for the legal system. As if to prove his point, Joseph's regular phone rang. When he answered, a voice Maria could hear clearly from across the small trailer spoke in heavily accented English. Mr. Walking Bear, this is Carlos Mendez, representing Mr. Rodriguez's interests. My employer is prepared to offer you $50,000 cash for the safe return of his property. The woman isn't property, Joseph said flatly. Be that as it may, Mr. Rodriguez is prepared to be generous. $100,000 final offer? Not interested, Joseph replied. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Walking Bear, I sincerely hope you'll reconsider. My employer is not a patient man and he has resources you can't imagine. This offer represents the easy way to resolve this situation. And if I don't take the easy way? Joseph asked. Then tomorrow evening, when the sun goes down, Mr. Rodriguez will come for what belongs to him, with or without your cooperation. The line went dead. Joseph set the phone down and looked at Maria, who had gone pale during the conversation. Tomorrow night, she whispered. Joseph, you have to let me go. I can't let you get hurt because of me. Joseph moved to the window and looked out at the desert landscape he had called home for 5 years. The red rocks and endless sky had been his refuge, his place of peace. Now they might become a battleground. There's something else I need to tell you, he said without turning around. Something I haven't told anyone in a long time. Maria waited, sensing this was important. My grandmother didn't just tell me we're all connected, Joseph said quietly. She told me that someday I would meet someone who would need my help, and that helping them would save us both. He turned to face her, and Maria saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. I've been waiting for you my whole life, Maria Santos, he said simply. I just didn't know it until yesterday. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Maria felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from a feeling she couldn't quite name. In 24 hours, this quiet, serious man had shown her more genuine care and respect than she had ever received from her own family. Joseph, she said softly. What are you saying? He moved closer but didn't reach for her. I'm saying that if we're going to face what's coming, we should face it together. Really together. Maria's breath caught. Are you asking me to marry you? Joseph's expression was completely serious. I'm asking you to choose, he said. Choose your own path, your own future. If that path leads to me, then yes, I'm asking you to marry me. Tonight, before Rodriguez comes back. As my wife, you'd have legal protections he can't touch. And more than that, you'd have someone who will never see you as property or a debt to be paid. Maria stared at him, her mind racing. 24 hours ago, she had been running from a forced marriage to a man she despised. Now she was being offered a choice by a man who had risked everything to protect her. You don't really know me, she said, voicing the practical concern even as her heart was already giving its answer. I know you're brave enough to run from a life you didn't want, Joseph replied. I know you're kind enough to make breakfast for a stranger who helped you. I know you'd rather face an uncertain future than accept an intolerable present. That's enough for me. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Tomorrow night would come whether they were ready or not. If I say yes, Maria said carefully, it has to be because I want to, not because I'm afraid. I won't trade one prison for another, even a comfortable one. Joseph nodded. I wouldn't want you any other way." Maria looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen before. Genuine respect, honest affection, and the promise of a partnership between equals. It wasn't the passionate romance of movies, but it was something deeper and more real. "Then yes," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "Yes, Joseph Walking Bear, I'll marry you tonight." By late afternoon, Joseph had made the arrangements with a speed and efficiency that reminded Maria of his military background. His cousin Tommy had connected them with Elder Sarah Begay, a respected medicine woman who could perform traditional Navajo ceremonies. His army buddy Mike was driving up from Flagstaff with the legal paperwork to make. Everything official in the eyes of both tribal and state law. Maria had spent the day helping Joseph prepare his small home for what might become a siege. They moved furniture to create clear lines of sight to all the windows, checked the ammunition for his rifles, and prepared emergency supplies in case they needed to leave quickly. "I never imagined my wedding day would involve loading ammunition," Maria said with dark humor as she helped Joseph count bullets. "I never imagined I'd have a wedding day at all," Joseph replied, and the honesty in his voice made Maria look up at him with new understanding. "You really meant what you said about waiting your whole life?" she realized. Joseph paused in his work. "After I came back from overseas, I couldn't imagine sharing my life with anyone. The nightmares, the anger, the way I jumped at every unexpected sound. I thought I was too broken to be anyone's husband." "What changed?" Maria asked gently. Joseph met her eyes. "You looked at me yesterday like I was someone worth trusting," he said simply. "For the first time in years, I saw myself through someone else's eyes and didn't hate what I saw." As the sun began to set, Elder Begay arrived in an old pickup truck that had seen better days. She was a small woman with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind her came Mike, Joseph's army buddy, a stocky man with kind eyes and a briefcase full of legal documents. "You sure about this, Joe?" Mike asked as he set up the paperwork on Joseph's small kitchen table. "I mean, I'm happy for you, but this is pretty sudden." Joseph looked at Maria, who was helping Elder Begay prepare sacred items for the ceremony. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said. Elder Begay had brought traditional Navajo wedding items, including a basket woven by her grandmother and corn pollen blessed in sacred ceremonies. She spoke quietly with Maria about the meaning of the rituals, explaining that Navajo marriages were partnerships based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. "In our tradition," Elder Begay told Maria, "marriage isn't just about two people. It's about two families coming together, two spirits choosing to walk the same path. But in your case, child, I see something different. I see two people who have both been walking alone, choosing to face whatever comes together." As darkness fell, they gathered outside Joseph's trailer, under a sky brilliant with stars. The desert was quiet except for the distant call of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Joseph had strung lights around a small area, creating a circle of warm light in the vast darkness. Maria wore a simple dress that Elder Begay had brought, deep blue with silver trim that caught the starlight. Joseph wore clean jeans and his best shirt, with a silver bolo tie that had belonged to his grandfather. They looked at each other across the small circle, and Maria felt her heart steady for the first time since she had fled her first wedding. Elder Begay began the ceremony with prayers in Navajo, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. She spoke about the importance of walking in beauty, of harmony between all living things, and of the sacred bond between husband and wife. "Joseph Walking Bear," she said, switching to English, "do you promise to protect this woman not by keeping her weak, but by helping her become strong?" "I do," Joseph replied, his voice steady and sure. "Maria Santos," Elder Begay continued, "do you promise to stand beside this man not as his possession, but as his equal partner?" "I do," Maria said, surprised by how right the words felt. They exchanged rings that Mike had somehow managed to find in Flagstaff, simple silver bands that caught the light of the stars. When Joseph slipped the ring onto Maria's finger, she felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Elder Begay blessed them with corn pollen and spoke final prayers as Mike handled the legal documentation that would make their marriage official. When it was over, Joseph and Maria stood hand in hand under the vast desert sky, legally married and spiritually bonded. "How do you feel?" Joseph asked quietly as Elder Bigay and Mike packed up their things. Maria considered the question seriously. Free, she said finally. For the first time in my life, completely free. They said goodbye to their guests with Elder Bigay pressing a small leather pouch into Maria's hands. Traditional protection medicine, she explained. For tomorrow. After Mike and Elder Bigay drove away, Joseph and Maria stood alone in the desert night. The reality of what they had just done was beginning to sink in. We're really married, Maria said almost wonderingly. We're really married, Joseph confirmed. How does that feel? Maria looked at this man who had become her husband. This quiet, serious person who had risked everything to give her a choice about her own life. It feels right, she said. Scary, but right. They went back inside the trailer, suddenly awkward with each other in a way they hadn't been before. Everything had changed between them, even though in many ways nothing had changed at all. I don't expect anything, Joseph said quietly as they prepared for bed. I mean, this marriage, it can be whatever you need it to be. Maria looked at him with gratitude and something deeper. Joseph, I need you to know something. When I said yes today, it wasn't just because I was scared or because I needed protection. It was because in one day, you showed me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness. She moved closer to him, close enough to see the starlight reflected in his dark eyes. I want this to be a real marriage, she said softly. Not just a legal arrangement, but a real partnership, if you want that too. Joseph's answer was to gently take her face in his hands and kiss her, soft and sweet under the desert stars visible through his small window. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. I love you, Maria Walking Bear, Joseph said, and the name sounded perfect in the quiet night. I love you too, Maria replied, and meant it completely. They spent their wedding night talking quietly about their hopes for the future, about the challenges they would face, and about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Outside, the desert kept its ancient watch, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes sang to the moon. Neither of them mentioned the fact that tomorrow night, Rodriguez would come with his men to collect what he still believed belonged to him. Tonight was theirs, and they claimed it completely. By late afternoon, Joseph had made the arrangements with a speed and efficiency that reminded Maria of his military background. His cousin Tommy had connected them with Elder Sarah Bigay, a respected medicine woman who could perform traditional Navajo ceremonies. His army buddy Mike was driving up from Flagstaff with the legal paperwork to make. Everything official in the eyes of both tribal and state law. Maria had spent the day helping Joseph prepare his small home for what might become a siege. They moved furniture to create clear lines of sight to all the windows, checked the ammunition for his rifles, and prepared emergency supplies in case they needed to leave quickly. I never imagined my wedding day would involve loading ammunition, Maria said with dark humor as she helped Joseph count bullets. I never imagined I'd have a wedding day at all, Joseph replied, and the honesty in his voice made Maria look up at him with new understanding. You really meant what you said about waiting your whole life, she realized. Joseph paused in his work. After I came back from overseas, I couldn't imagine sharing my life with anyone. The nightmares, the anger, the way I jumped at every unexpected sound. I thought I was too broken to be anyone's husband. What changed? Maria asked gently. Joseph met her eyes. You looked at me yesterday like I was someone worth trusting, he said simply. For the first time in years, I saw myself through someone else's eyes and didn't hate what I saw. As the sun began to set, Elder Bigay arrived in an old pickup truck that had seen better days. She was a small woman with silver hair braided down her back, and eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind her came Mike, Joseph's army buddy, a stocky man with kind eyes and a briefcase full of legal documents. You sure about this, Joe? Mike asked as he set up the paperwork on Joseph's small kitchen table. I mean, I'm happy for you, but this is pretty sudden. Joseph looked at Maria, who was helping Elder Bigay prepare sacred items for the ceremony. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said. Elder Bigay had brought traditional Navajo wedding items, including a basket woven by her grandmother and corn pollen blessed in sacred ceremonies. She spoke quietly with Maria about the meaning of the rituals, explaining that Navajo marriages were partnerships based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. In our tradition, Elder Bigay told Maria, marriage isn't just about two people. It's about two families coming together, two spirits choosing to walk the same path. But in your case, child, I see something different. I see two people who have both been walking alone, choosing to face whatever comes together. As darkness fell, they gathered outside Joseph's trailer under a sky brilliant with stars. The desert was quiet except for the distant call of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Joseph had strung lights around a small area, creating a circle of warm light in the vast darkness. Maria wore a simple dress that Elder Begay had brought, deep blue with silver trim that caught the starlight. Joseph wore clean jeans and his best shirt, with a silver bolo tie that had belonged to his grandfather. They looked at each other across the small circle, and Maria felt her heart steady for the first time since she had fled her first wedding. Elder Begay began the ceremony with prayers in Navajo, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. She spoke about the importance of walking in beauty, of harmony between all living things, and of the sacred bond between husband and wife. Joseph walking bare, she said, switching to English. Do you promise to protect this woman not by keeping her weak, but by helping her become strong? I do, Joseph replied, his voice steady and sure. Maria Santos, Elder Begay continued, do you promise to stand beside this man not as his possession, but as his equal partner? I do, Maria said, surprised by how right the words felt. They exchanged rings that Mike had somehow managed to find in Flagstaff, simple silver bands that caught the light of the stars. When Joseph slipped the ring onto Maria's finger, she felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. Elder Begay blessed them with corn pollen and spoke final prayers as Mike handled the legal documentation that would make their marriage official. When it was over, Joseph and Maria stood hand in hand under the vast desert sky, legally married and spiritually bonded. How do you feel? Joseph asked quietly as Elder Begay and Mike packed up their things. Maria considered the question seriously. Free, she said finally. For the first time in my life, completely free. They said goodbye to their guests, with Elder Begay pressing a small leather pouch into Maria's hands. Traditional protection medicine, she explained. For tomorrow. After Mike and Elder Begay drove away, Joseph and Maria stood alone in the desert night. The reality of what they had just done was beginning to sink in. We're really married, Maria said almost wonderingly. We're really married, Joseph confirmed. How does that feel? Maria looked at this man who had become her husband, this quiet, serious person who had risked everything to give her a choice about her own life. It feels right, she said. Scary, but right. They went back inside the trailer, suddenly awkward with each other in a way they hadn't been before. Everything had changed between them, even though in many ways nothing had changed at all. I don't expect anything, Joseph said quietly as they prepared for bed. I mean, this marriage, it can be whatever you need it to be. Maria looked at him with gratitude and something deeper. Joseph, I need you to know something. When I said yes today, it wasn't just because I was scared or because I needed protection. It was because in one day you showed me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness. She moved closer to him, close enough to see the starlight reflected in his dark eyes. I want this to be a real marriage, she said softly. Not just a legal arrangement, but a real partnership. If you want that too. Joseph's answer was to gently take her face in his hands and kiss her, soft and sweet under the desert stars visible through his small window. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. I love you. Maria Walking Bear, Joseph said, and the name sounded perfect in the quiet night. I love you too, Maria replied, and meant it completely. They spent their wedding night talking quietly about their hopes for the future. About the sea the next morning, Maria woke as the sun painted the desert in soft golden light. For a moment she forgot where she was, but then she saw Joseph sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the horizon with alert eyes, and everything came back to her. She was married. She was safe, at least for now, and tonight they would face whatever Rodriguez brought with him. See anything? She asked quietly, sitting up in bed. Joseph turned to her with a small smile. Just my cattle and a roadrunner who seems very interested in my truck. But that'll change soon enough. They spent the morning going over their plans one more time. Joseph had called in backup from some of his army friends who lived within driving distance, and Tommy had promised to have tribal police nearby when Rodriguez arrived. Mike had filed emergency injunctions with both tribal and federal courts that would make any attempt to take Maria by force a federal crime. On paper, we should win this easily, Joseph said as he checked his rifle for the third time that morning. Rodriguez has no legal claim to you, especially now that you're married to someone else. But you don't think it's going to be that simple, Maria observed. Joseph's expression was grim. Men like Rodriguez don't usually let legal technicalities stop them. He's invested too much pride and money in this to just walk away. Around noon, 2 vehicles arrived at Joseph's property, but these weren't Rodriguez's men. Instead, 3 weathered men in their 40s and 50s climbed out, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of former soldiers. Joseph greeted them like the old friends they were. "Maria, meet Jake, Danny, and Pete," Joseph said. "We served together overseas." The men were polite but serious, treating Maria with the respect due to a fellow soldier's wife while clearly preparing for conflict. Jake, the obvious leader of the group, pulled Joseph aside for a quiet conversation about tactics and positioning. "How bad do you think this will get?" Maria asked Danny, who was setting up observation equipment near the trailer's windows. Danny, a compact man with graying hair and kind eyes, considered the question seriously. "Depends on how smart Rodriguez is," he said. "If he's smart, he'll realize he's lost and walk away. If he's not smart, or if he's too proud to lose face, then we might have a real problem." As afternoon wore on, the tension in the air became almost physical. Joseph's friends took positions around the property, using the natural cover of rocks and desert plants to create defensive positions. Tommy arrived with 2 other tribal police officers, all of them armed and taking the situation seriously. "Rodriguez tried to pressure the tribal council this morning," Tommy told Joseph privately. "Claimed you were harboring a fugitive and interfering with his business interests. The council told him to handle it through proper legal channels, and his challenges they would face, and about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together." Outside, the desert kept its ancient watch, and somewhere in the distance coyotes sang to the moon. Neither of them mentioned the fact that tomorrow night, Rodriguez would come with his men to collect what he still believed belonged to him. Tonight was theirs, and they claimed it completely. 3 months after that night in the desert, Maria stood in the doorway of their expanded home watching Joseph work with his cattle in the morning sun. The small trailer had been replaced with a modest but comfortable house, built with help from the same community members who had stood with them against Rodriguez. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and miraculous. Maria had found work at the tribal health clinic, using skills she had learned caring for her younger siblings to help other families in the community. Joseph continued ranching, but now he had a partner who shared both his work and his dreams. "Mrs. Walking Bear," called a voice from the road. Maria turned to see Dr. Sarah Martinez from the clinic approaching with a clipboard and a smile. "I have some news I think you'll want to hear." Maria invited her in for coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table Joseph had built by hand. Dr. Martinez pulled out some official-looking documents. "The state medical board approved your application for nursing school," she said. "With your experience at the clinic and the recommendation letters from the community, they're offering you a full scholarship." Maria stared at the papers, hardly believing what she was reading. "Nursing school?" she repeated. 2 years in Flagstaff with clinical rotations here at the reservation hospital. You could come home every weekend, and when you graduate, there's a position waiting for you as head nurse at our new family health center." When Joseph came in for lunch, he found Maria sitting at the table with tears in her eyes and acceptance letters spread in front of her. Without saying a word, he pulled her into his arms. "Happy tears?" he asked. "The happiest," Maria confirmed. "I'm going to be a nurse, Joseph." "A real nurse with a real education." Joseph kissed the top of her head. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "And I'm not surprised. You've been taking care of people since the day I met you." That evening, they drove to town for dinner to celebrate Maria's acceptance into nursing school. The little restaurant was busy, but they found a quiet table by the window. As they ate, Maria found herself thinking about how much her life had changed since that terrifying night when she ran across the desert in a wedding dress. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night?" she asked Joseph. Joseph considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually," he said. "Maybe not that dramatic way, but somehow. My grandmother always said that the people who are meant to be in your life will find a way to get there." After dinner, they stopped by Elder Begay's house to share the good news about nursing school. The old woman listened with bright eyes and then disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a small wrapped bundle. "For you," she told Maria. "Something to keep you safe while you're away at school." Inside the soft leather wrapping was a beautiful silver bracelet, clearly very old and obviously precious. "Elder Bigay, I can't accept this," Maria protested. "It's too valuable," the old woman smiled. "Child, this bracelet belonged to my grandmother, who was a healer. She always said it would know when it found the right hands." She fastened it around Maria's wrist. "It's been waiting 60 years for you." As they drove home under the vast desert sky, Maria touched the bracelet and felt connected to generations of strong women who had walked this land before her. She was part of something larger now, part of a community and a heritage that welcomed her not as property or an obligation, but as family. "I got a letter today, too," Joseph said, as they pulled into their driveway. "From Mike. Good news?" Maria asked. Joseph nodded. Rodriguez was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge said his trafficking operation was one of the worst she'd ever seen. He won't be bothering anyone for a very long time. Maria felt a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying lift from her shoulders. "It's really over then," she said. "It's really over," Joseph confirmed. "And we're really just beginning." That night, as they sat on their porch looking at the stars, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a frightened young woman with no choices and no hope. Now she was a wife, a community member, and soon to be a nursing student with a bright future ahead of her. "Joseph," she said quietly, "do you think we'll always be happy like this?" Joseph took her hand, his thumb tracing over her wedding ring and Elder Begay's bracelet. "I think we'll have good times and hard times just like everyone else," he said honestly. "But I think we'll face them together, and that makes all the difference." A shooting star streaked across the sky above them, and Maria made a wish for their future. Not for perfect happiness, because she had learned that perfect happiness was impossible. Instead, she wished for the strength to keep choosing love over fear, partnership over possession, and hope over despair. "I love you, Joseph Walking Bear," she said, the words still feeling new and miraculous on her tongue. "I love you too, Maria Walking Bear," he replied, "and I always will." In the distance, coyotes sang to the moon, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and rain. Maria had found her home at last, not just in a place but in a love that honored her strength and celebrated her freedom. She had learned that sometimes the best things in life came not from careful planning, but from the courage to run toward an uncertain future and the wisdom to recognize safety when it offered itself with gentle hands and honest eyes. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities. Maria would start preparing for nursing school. Joseph would continue building their life together, and the community that had embraced them would go on being the kind of place where people stood up for each other when it mattered most. But tonight, under the ancient stars that had watched over countless love stories in this desert land, Maria and Joseph simply held each other and felt grateful for the mysterious forces that had brought two lonely people together at exactly the right moment to save each other's lives. 2 years later, Maria walked across the stage at Northern Arizona University in her white nursing graduation gown, her eyes scanning the audience until she found Joseph sitting in the front row with the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face. Elder Begay sat beside him, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she wiped tears from her eyes. After the ceremony, as families gathered to celebrate with their graduates, Maria felt overwhelmed by how many people had come to support her. Tommy was there with his wife and children, Dr. Martinez from the clinic, Mike, who had driven up from Phoenix, and at least a dozen other community members who had become her extended family. "We're so proud of you," Elder Begay said, pressing a small gift into Maria's hands. Inside the simple box was a pin that read "Head Nurse" in silver letters. "For your new position at the health center." Maria hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "You did this yourself, child," Elder Begay replied. "We just gave you the chance to show what you were always capable of." That evening, there was a celebration at the community center that seemed to include half the reservation. Tables were loaded with traditional foods. Children ran between the adults playing games, and someone had set up speakers for music and dancing. Joseph found Maria standing a little apart from the crowd, watching the celebration with a thoughtful expression. "Penny for your thoughts, Nurse Walking Bear," he said, slipping his arms around her from behind. Maria leaned back against his chest. "I was just thinking about that girl who ran across the desert in a wedding dress 2 years ago. She seems like a different person now." "She was always this person," Joseph said gently. "She just needed the chance to become who she really was." "Dance with me?" Maria asked, turning in his arms. They moved onto the makeshift dance floor, swaying to a slow country song while their friends and neighbors celebrated around them. Maria noticed several young women watching them with soft expressions, and she realized that their story had become something of a legend in the community. "Look," Joseph murmured, nodding toward the edge of the dance floor. Maria turned to see a young Apache, woman she didn't recognize, talking quietly with Dr. Martinez. The woman looked nervous and kept glancing around as if she expected someone to stop her from being there. "She reminds me of someone," Maria said with a small smile. After the song ended, Maria approached the young woman. Up close, she could see that the stranger was probably 18 or 19, with the same combination of fear and determination that Maria remembered feeling during her own desperate flight. "Hi," Maria said gently. "I'm Maria Walking Bear. I work at the health clinic." "I'm Lisa," the young woman replied quietly. "Lisa Crowfeather. Dr. Martinez said you might be able to help me." Over the next hour, sitting in a quiet corner of the community center, Lisa told Maria a story that was disturbingly familiar. An arranged marriage to an older man, family pressure to accept a situation she found intolerable, and a growing desperation to find another way. "I heard about what happened to you," Lisa said. "How you got away and started a new life. Dr. Martinez said you might understand." Maria looked across the room at Joseph, who was deep in conversation with some of the other men but keeping one eye on her, as he always did. She thought about the choices that had brought her to this moment, and about the responsibility that came with being someone others looked to for hope. "Lisa," she said carefully, "what happened to me was dangerous and terrifying, and I was incredibly lucky. But you're right that I understand what you're going through." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The most important thing I learned is that you always have choices, even when it doesn't feel like it. They might not be easy choices, but they're there." Over the following weeks, Maria worked with Dr. Martinez and other community leaders to help Lisa explore her options. Unlike Maria's situation, Lisa's family was willing to listen when presented with alternatives to the arranged marriage. The young man Lisa was supposed to marry turned out to be more interested in a willing bride than a reluctant one, and the whole situation was resolved without drama or danger. "You're becoming quite the counselor," Joseph observed one evening as Maria finished a long phone call with another young woman seeking advice. "It's strange," Maria mused. "I spent so many years feeling powerless, and now people come to me because they think I'm strong." "You are strong," Joseph said simply. "You always were. You just needed to discover it for yourself." As summer turned to fall, Maria settled into her new role as head nurse at the expanded health center. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying, and she found herself becoming a trusted figure in the community, someone people came to not just for medical care but for guidance and support. One evening in late September, exactly 2 years after the night Rodriguez had been arrested, Maria and Joseph sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. Their house was larger now, with room for the children they were planning to have, and the land around it was dotted with the improvements Joseph had made with help from his friends. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Joseph asked. "Before all the craziness, I mean. The quiet, solitary life?" Maria considered the question seriously. "Do you know what I miss?" she said finally. "I miss thinking that I was broken, that I wasn't worth fighting for, that my only value was what other people decided it was." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "That's what you miss?" Maria laughed. "No, that's what I absolutely don't miss. I was being sarcastic." She grew more serious. "What I really miss is the simplicity of believing that I didn't have any choices. It was terrible, but it was also simple. Now I have to make decisions every day about who I want to be and how I want to live." "And how's that working out for you?" Joseph asked with a smile. Maria looked at their home, thought about her work at the clinic, remembered the celebration of her graduation, and the young women who sought her advice. "It's working out pretty well," she said. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from that desperate flight across the desert to this moment of peace and purpose. She had learned that freedom wasn't just about escaping from something, but about having the courage to choose what you move toward. "Joseph," she said softly, "thank you for showing me what it means to be chosen rather than owned." "Thank you for showing me what it means to have someone worth protecting," he replied. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to become the best versions of themselves. Around them, the desert kept its ancient watch, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes sang their eternal songs to the moon. Maria touched the silver bracelet Elder Begay had given her, now joined by a watch that marked her new professional status and a small silver charm Joseph had given her to celebrate their second anniversary. Each piece told part of her story, but together they spoke of something larger, a life chosen rather than imposed, a future built on love rather than fear, and a happiness earned through courage rather than granted by chance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help others find their own paths to freedom. But tonight, under the same stars that had witnessed her desperate flight and her wedding vows, Maria Walking Bear was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by love and filled with hope for all the tomorrows yet to come.